The night began with the color of old oil, thick, gleaming, hot. Lucia held the pan in one hand, pretending ease before the phone camera perched on a tiny tripod on the counter. "Dinner live," she announced with that carefully measured warmth her audience believed was genuine. There were sponsors behind that word: extra virgin oil from a Garda brand, cheese from a supposedly artisanal dairy, a young wine that promised notes of cherry and confidences. Matteo drifted in and out of frame like a discreet waiter, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly damp, a smile that only revealed teeth when it had to. The apartment, a flat in the Santo Stefano area, held its silence behind the objects: green blinds half drawn, copper light from the Audi J filtering in, a mocha pot gone cold on the stove, a gym bag by the door, still tied. From the kitchen window, you could glimpse the rooftops and, beyond them, a sliver of sky slowly turning orange. If you listened closely, you could catch the faint hum of a motorcycle over Ponte Pietra, the echo of voices from Via Ponte Nuovo. Verona, from that domestic angle, looked like a tame animal breathing out of habit. The city would look good on the live stream. Everything had to look good. It always had, or so it seemed. While Lucia spoke about the pasta, a simple classic, she said, like someone petting a cat, Matteo shifted the phone to show the sautéed mushrooms. The live stream rolled on, hundreds of comments flickering up the screen like nervous fireflies. The family dinner they weren't was being broadcast to thousands of strangers. Sponsors in the corner. Polished jokes. A choreographed kiss or two, arriving just when the algorithm demanded affection. Then came the voice, by accident. A brief sound, like paper crumpling. A click from the back of the phone. The wireless mic Lucia had removed to go to the bathroom had switched on again. It stayed hooked to Matteo's pocket, unseen, and far too powerful. What happened a meter from the camera, outside the frame, became public. She said, "Enough, Matteo. I can't keep holding up your lie, our lie." She didn't raise her voice. She said it with the quiet of exhaustion, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to spend. You could hear a glass being dried with a towel. "Your trainer came again to correct your posture, didn't he? And you stayed 2 hours, didn't you?" "I can count, love." He replied low, so low it sounded like he was speaking to a closet. "It's not your problem, Lucia. This farce feeds us. I told you I'd handle it. Don't start now." Lucia let out a laugh that wasn't hers. A laugh as thin as a stretched wire. "Don't worry, darling. I'll go back to being the girl who eats pasta and loves her man. It's just that sometimes I wish you loved something in me that wasn't analytics." The silence that followed lasted exactly as long as it took for the water to reach a boil. Those watching the live stream heard it as if it were inside their own kitchens. The microphone doesn't forgive. It doesn't understand irony. It doesn't know when a soft voice is more dangerous than a scream. Matteo performed the kind of patchwork men good at hiding things tend to do. "It's a deal, Lucia. You agreed to it. Let's not do this tonight." And then she said what the whole city heard: "Your husband is gay, Matteo. And I'm the smiling wife." That was the plan. Money, brand, photos, Verona in the background. "I just can't smile anymore. Not tonight." Then came the formal chaos, Matteo fumbling to turn off the phone, a clumsy attempt to remove the mic, the stream cutting, the screen going black. In the house, the scent of browned garlic hovered over the conversation that never resumed. Outside, the Audi J kept flowing, indifferent, as if that confession hadn't altered anything in the old world of bridges and bells. But it had. In Verona, everything is heard, and if it isn't, it's imagined. And imagination needs so little. Humiliation took on a cold blue color. It swept through the night with the feel of glass. In the arena, a concert ended with applause that sounded plastic. In Piazza Bra, tourists drank wine with hands trembling from fatigue. But on the screens, thousands of screens, the video looped, clipped and subtitled by strangers writing bravery and sham with the same fury. Notifications fell like hail on Lucia's phone. They insulted her, defended her, built theories, edited clips with music and text. You could feel the hunger of a crowd needing a story to feed on. By morning, that same crowd called her honest. And the oil sponsor emailed her, asking if she planned to issue an official statement to reshape the narrative. Efficiency can be terrifying. Lucia slept on the couch, or pretended to. Her neck was stiff, eyes open. The house smelled of damp noodles, that mix of tomato and defeat that sticks to the air. Matteo paced from the bedroom to the kitchen barefoot, standing by the window. He looked toward Saint Anastasia, unseen, but sensed, and lit a cigarette he didn't usually smoke. He was the one who cared for his body, who ran along the Adige at 6, who ate clean, who preached routines. That dawn, though, he looked old. Not because of wrinkles, but by the way he bent his back to hide from a smoke that was his own. Lucia and Matteo, common names, precise lives. She, of average height, hair hastily tied back, eyes that had learned to light up on command. He, a body that seemed aware of being seen, with that poise born from years under observation. It wasn't love that bound them, at least not the cheerful kind. It was a sort of loyalty to the plan. They had signed an unsigned contract. She had known even before the wedding. He had chosen her carefully. A mutual friend introduced them at a brand event on Via Mazzini. Verona as a backdrop. A strong coffee, a look, we need to grow together, a few discreet laughs. She feared many things, obscurity, working without a safety net, the algorithm burying her like it had thousands of others. Matteo feared himself, and the city, and his mother, and Saint Zeno, who doesn't forgive. He feared the men at his gym, who greeted each other with slaps on the back, just a little too hard. The lie was a shelter against exposure. And suddenly, it had ripped open in public, like a badly sewn curtain. The next day was pale yellow. The phones never stopped. All but 2 brands sent messages of support and understanding, while quietly calculating the impact on sales. A local magazine offered them a no filters cover story. Lucia received messages from women who said they understood, and from men who wanted to know how she found out and if she was sure. The city played its favorite game, rumor, with classical efficiency. The older couple downstairs came up with freshly baked bread. The woman, seeing Matteo, lowered her head slightly, as if decency meant not looking. Verona doesn't scandalize over what it believes it's seen many times before, it scandalizes over what's said out loud. Matteo went to shower. He stayed under the water a long time. There, where there were no cameras, he allowed himself to hit the tile with his knuckles. Not out of rage at Lucia, nor exactly at himself, but at the smell of fear that had followed him all his life. He remembered Lorenzo. Began to whisper his name, as if summoning him. Lorenzo Rinaldi, politician from a good family, neatly trimmed beard, pale shirts, restrained smile. Conservative wing. Local TV appearances speaking of traditional family and values. In private, hands trembling with postponed desire. Drives to the orchards beyond the Adige, to kiss in half-darkness. They met at a charity event, when Lorenzo came to deliver checks to a sports association. Matteo approached to greet him out of courtesy. Lorenzo touched his arm a fraction too long. That centimeter, that infinitesimal delay, opened life in a direction neither confessed. After that, they met like thieves. In an apartment Lorenzo rented under his cousin's name, for studying, he said. A room with bone-colored walls, a bed that made no sound, a window facing a courtyard where sheets hung to dry. The world there became carnal and shy, as if the flesh itself apologized for existing. They never spoke of it. They couldn't. Matteo came home with eyes too clean, and Lucia, who knew how to read skin, began to understand without words. That afternoon, Lucia walked alone along the Adige, from Ponte Pietra to Ponte della Vittoria. She wore a thin trench coat and a black wool hat. It wasn't a theatrical gesture, it was her way of seeking the city's noise to shelter her own. Tourists moved along Verona's edges like slow-moving stains of color. Beside her, an old man read a newspaper. On the front page, a cropped photo of her face. He looked up and folded the paper with an old-fashioned gentleness. "Courage," he said, as if offering a word found in his pocket. Lucia thanked him with a gesture that looked like the beginning of tears. Pretending is exhausting, but healing is, too. Meanwhile, Matteo received a message from Lorenzo. 2 words, "Are you okay?" The dry tone hid the urgency of a man who couldn't show it. He wanted to see him. He couldn't. He had a party meeting. "We'll stand firm against defamation," he would later say into a microphone, about something else entirely. That afternoon, in his office lined with new shelves, Lorenzo placed the phone face down. He listened to his advisors talk strategy and clean image. He thought of the scent of Matteo's skin fresh from the shower. An honest smell. The fact that honesty has a smell and not a speech is a troublesome detail for certain careers. Lucia returned home before dusk. Matteo sat at the table with his laptop. He had written a text, a kind of private statement, "Lucia and I value sincerity," and on it went, wrapped in that medicated softness of PR talk. She read, then stopped reading. She went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were ringed, her gaze carrying a strange brightness she hadn't known since before the lie. Night entered with its truest shade of blue. In the hallway, they passed each other, brushing elbows lightly. The body seeks alliance even when there's no love left. Lucia stopped and said, "Tomorrow I'll go live. Alone. I'll tell my side." Matteo nodded. It was the most genuine movement he'd made in weeks. Her live stream took place on a Wednesday. The light filtering through the blinds was gold, fractured gold. Lucia set up the phone without filters, face washed, hair loose. She said hi as if greeting a neighbor in the stairwell. She spoke plainly. She said she had loved an idea. That she had cared for a brand as one might care for a child that isn't theirs. She admitted her fear of financial exposure, of disappearing. She said she'd known about Matteo's desire long before the wedding. That no one had deceived her, because she had chosen the lie. "It's hard to admit," she added, "but it's the closest I've ever been to freedom." The chat grew unusually quiet. Silence isn't easy to read on screens, but it exists. It measures itself in the absence of jokes. In the delay of a reply. In the comment that doesn't dare to come. The city went on living, but close by. Off camera, the doorman swept the leaves from his doorway, a delivery man dropped off a box from an online supermarket, a child dragged a yellow scooter down the hallway. Verona, with its ochre facades, stone balconies, and damp stains shaped like island maps, stood as the steady backdrop. People celebrated Lucia's honesty with almost childlike enthusiasm. They uploaded clips, declared, "That's how it's done." Those who had insulted her the night before now blessed her. Public affection changes fast, but it also has tenderness. She accepted that embrace without fully believing it. She learned that sincerity, when it becomes a trend, is a restless animal. It grows impatient. It demands more. Matteo didn't go live. That was his first real decision. Instead, he walked through Via Sottoriva, moving with the careful gait of someone hoping not to be seen. In the distance, the Lamberti Tower cut through the sky like an arrow frozen midair. In a corner trattoria, a muted television showed his face beside Lucia's. The headline read, "The Truth Behind Perfect Love." He smiled weakly at the waitress, ordered a short espresso, and drank it standing, eyes fixed on the floor. He wondered how to debut his voice without lying. The word coming out felt too large, like a suit 2 sizes too big. He wasn't ready to wear it. But he could choose whom not to lie to anymore, Lucia. That afternoon, she turned off her phone and sat across from him at the dining table. No cameras. No sponsors. Just the smell of a closed-up house and an orange peel left on a plate. They decided, no notary, no signatures, to keep living in the same apartment until they could afford 2 rents without selling their story's fragility. He would stop using her as an alibi. She would stop turning her wound into merchandise. And then we'll see, she said. We'll see, he repeated, with a gratitude he barely dared to meet with his eyes. The color of that pact was light gray. Not romantic. But clean, as far as possible. From then on, they allowed themselves small, discreet truths. He began wearing a new cologne, the one Lorenzo liked. She stopped faking many of her good mornings, replacing them with soft silences, like a sheet stretched out without hurry. The house returned to the sounds of human beings, not presenters, a cough, the creak of a drawer, the gentle thud of a cup on marble. Lorenzo kept existing, but from the other side of the glass. He called Matteo at night, voice measured. We won't see each other for a while, he'd say. The politician spoke with that caution that mimics sincerity without being it. He was afraid of losing his seat, his name, his photo beside the bishop at local events. Matteo understood, and hated him a little for it. He desired him the way one desires what could ruin a life completely. In a near-teenage impulse, Matteo one afternoon took his bicycle and crossed half of Verona to Piazza Corrubbio, where they used to sit and watch people go by from the corner bar. He stopped half a block away. Saw Lorenzo come out with 2 suited men, laughing, touching each other's shoulders with that ease of those long accustomed to pretending. He didn't approach. Watched him like a painting he couldn't touch. Then pedaled home, breathing evenly, because if he had learned anything in those weeks, it was not to wreck what Lucia was building, her space of air. The echo of Lucia's live stream left behind opportunities. A cosmetics brand proposed a campaign called Skin Without Scripts. A Milan newspaper offered her a weekly column on emotional well-being. She hesitated. She didn't want redemption to become a product. In the end, she accepted only what didn't require her to perform. She went to a school in San Zeno to talk to the final-year students about taking care of what you share. She sat in the back row, not on stage. Spoke of mistakes in a slow voice. Afterward, a boy came up to her and said he was afraid to tell his father he wanted to study dance. He said, "Thank you," in a trembling thread of voice so sincere that Lucia's fingers shook. She walked home along the riverbank, November's cold biting her knuckles, feeling that at last she was doing something that didn't ask for applause. The press, always hungry for an antagonist, went after Matteo. They hounded him with questions that began, "Is it true that?" He neither denied nor confirmed. He said, "I won't talk about my private life." He learned to repeat it with a calm that at first seemed carved from marble and later, from flesh. The gym turned into a minefield of stares. One of the regulars said, "Tough luck, man," with a blend of pity and curiosity. Matteo smiled automatically, but inside he felt like he was standing on a bridge's edge. That day, he trained less. He brought home a bag of large oranges. Peeled them patiently. Sometimes, peeling fruit is a way of staying human. One night, Lucia stepped into the bedroom they now shared as polite neighbors and left a note on his bedside table. It was an address, for a therapist, recommended by a friend. "Not so you'll change," she said from the doorway. "So you can listen to yourself without needing to run after." Matteo didn't answer. The next day, he called. Went to the office near Porta Borsari. The walls were white, but not a painful white. A painting of a green field hung above the couch. Matteo spoke little at first. Then he spoke. He cried once. A silent cry, the kind that knows it's a beginning. When he left, Verona was full of cold light. He bought a panino and sat on the steps of San Fermo, eating as people passed by, carrying shopping bags, holding children tugging at their mother's hands. He looked up and, for the first time in a long while, didn't imagine himself from the outside. Lorenzo, meanwhile, was getting tangled in his own threads. His party smelled trouble and kept him at a distance. He tried to appear stronger than ever in his speeches, speaking of order and family with a harshness that bordered on parody. A columnist, perceptive, noticed. "He looks nervous," he wrote. One night, when his schedule left him a gap and fear had lowered enough to let him breathe, Lorenzo dared to send a more personal message: "I need to see you." Matteo, holding the phone between his palms, thought of Lucia's face, the neighbor's fresh bread, the therapist near Porta Borsari, his own back reflected in the shower mirror. He replied, "I can't. Not like this." Lorenzo wrote, "Then how?" Matteo turned off the phone and went to sleep. In bed, Lucia said nothing. Sometimes the greatest act of love between two people who don't love each other is to respect the other's sleep. December's wind arrived with the smell of wood smoke and damp laundry. Verona became prettier than was reasonable. The lights along Via Mazzini formed a golden tunnel. Piazza del Erbe filled with stands selling ornaments and spiced bread. Lucia recorded less. Went out more without her phone. Learned to have hands that didn't always have to hold a world. One afternoon, she stopped on Castelvecchio Bridge to watch the dark water. A couple nearby kissed in a hurry. She thought that perhaps sincerity doesn't heal, but it eases, and maybe that's enough. That night, she had dinner with her sister in a small restaurant in Borgo Trento, and they laughed with a kind of laughter she didn't recognize in her own throat, a laughter that didn't come from the camera. Matteo saw Lorenzo again in January. In neutral territory. On a street behind the cathedral, where the facades cast long shadows that stretched the hours. They looked at each other for a moment, like people who have survived a fire. There was no embrace, only distance. Lorenzo tried a smile, but it slipped. "I can't promise you anything," he said, with a belated honesty. "And I can't live like this," Matteo answered. There were no reproaches, just a silent inventory of what had tied them together: tenderness, skin, those small complicities that grow from repeating the same fears. Lorenzo's shoulders sank, almost boyish. "I need my job," he said, and it was the saddest line of the afternoon. Matteo walked aimlessly for a while, past the arch of Porta Leone and then toward the river. He didn't feel strong. He felt alive, which isn't the same thing, but sometimes it's enough. Over the months, Lucia and Matteo's apartment changed its acoustics. The echo was no longer that of an improvised studio, but of a home returning to its ordinary conversation. Small details told the story better than any narration could: the vase of flowers that kept being replaced, her coat now hanging inside, his bicycle resting in the corner, a new magnet on the fridge, a child's drawing gifted by the neighbor's son. There were dinners with friends where they talked about shows and recipes and laughed freely. There were also moments of nostalgia, for the ease of before, for the packaged comfort of guaranteed likes. Comfort is addictive, like so many things that don't do us good. Matteo quit the gym where he worked. "We don't fit anymore," he told the owner, who looked away toward the machines, as if they were witnesses needing distraction. He started training clients on his own, in parks, in homes, away from the showmanship. He discovered his voice could sound real. With some, he talked about breathing and posture. One day, he heard himself talking about fear, and was surprised by how calm he felt. At 6 in the morning, running along the Adige, he no longer ran to escape himself, but toward something he couldn't yet name. Maybe it was a clumsy attempt at redemption. Lucia, for her part, began to write. Not on a blog, not for paid collaborations, just for herself. A soft-covered notebook, black ink. It began with scattered sentences. The empty chair facing the window. The smell of the Adige when the light changes. Matteo takes a deep breath when he's thinking and keeps it. They seemed like useless notes, but they weren't. From that notebook came a story she later read in a small bookstore near Porto Vescovo, to a group of 20 people who listened in silence. It was a story without big conclusions, without moral lessons. When she finished, no one applauded right away. People looked at one another, then at her. There was a moment of beautiful emptiness. Then, yes, the hands came together. As she stepped outside, an older woman with white hair said, "It shows that it hurts less now." Lucia smiled as if someone had lifted a weight off her shoulders. Their relationship settled into the only form it could, sincere companionship. There was memory, of course, and gratitude. They shared morning coffee, some silences, 2 or 3 private jokes, grocery lists, the noisy boiler. In spring, something changed in the hallway light, and in the way they looked at each other on Sundays. It wasn't love, but it was loyalty. One day, when Matteo came home with the news that he'd found 3 new clients, Lucia applauded with her eyes. When Lucia said she preferred not to do any more resilience campaigns, Matteo said, "Good," without underlining it. They didn't need to agree on everything to want the other to breathe freely. About Lorenzo, the city's rumor finally faded. Like every rumor, it grew tired. The politician went on with his career, smile restrained, gaze calculated. He never wrote again. Matteo thought of him on some nights. Once, standing on the balcony, watching the rain, he felt a clean desire, stripped of fear. It wasn't desire for Lorenzo. It was desire for himself, which is different. With time, he met someone at a yoga class, someone who didn't feel dangerous or ill-timed. A thin instructor with steady hands. They looked at each other with an almost domestic ease. There was no secrecy this time. There was patience. Lucia knew something had changed by the calm that Matteo carried into the house one afternoon, round and unforced. She didn't ask. 2 days later, he told her, "I'm seeing someone." She said, "I'm glad," without performance. Outside, Verona smelled of fresh pizza and wet bicycles. In summer, the city turned into a slow oven. The stones of the arena breathed back the heat. Lucia and Matteo bought a large fan and set it up in the living room. They ate tomato salad and hard bread, watched old movies on low volume. Their old life felt like an expensive dream they no longer needed to repeat. Sometimes, yes, the sting of memory slipped in, an old video revived by a follower, a photo of a staged kiss in front of the Casa di Giulietta. They'd look at each other and laugh, a little embarrassed. "We were quite the actors," she'd say. "Too much," he'd answer. The church bells kept marking the hours. Verona, untouched by their small private earthquake, went on in its ancient beauty and modern routine. On Sunday mornings, the market in Piazza San Zeno sold objects that had outlived their owners, sepia photos, watches, a small radio that still worked. Lucia once stopped before an oval mirror with a wooden frame. She saw her face and thought it looked more like her own, not prettier, not younger, just hers. She bought it. Hung it in the hallway. Used it to check her hair before leaving. Sometimes, when they passed each other in the corridor, Matteo would glance at himself in that mirror, and see a face without disguise. Strange at first. Then freeing. One September afternoon, with the cool air returning like a loyal dog, they recorded something together again. Not a live stream. Not an ad. A short, sponsorless video. They walked along the riverbank, stopped at a bench facing the water. Talked about the city, about how they had learned to listen to the sounds of life that aren't recorded. "Many of you ask us to come back," Lucia said to the camera. "Not come back," Matteo added, "but we're still here." The video wasn't viral. It wasn't a love letter. It was a postcard from a new place they'd stumbled into. The comments were few, kind. Someone wrote, "You look like you can breathe again. You can't ask for more than that. Winter returned, dense and blue. On one of those nights when the cold paints shapes on the glass, Matteo received a message he didn't expect. From Lorenzo. A long text, for once. "I've separated," it said. He explained it wasn't a public announcement, that he wouldn't admit anything openly, that he just needed to say it somewhere. "I thought of you," it ended, delicate, clumsy. Matteo read it and didn't reply. Let it rest for a day, like a paper letter in a drawer. The next day, he wrote back, "I hope you feel more yourself." He didn't suggest meeting. Didn't hide either. Freedom isn't always going back to what once broke you, sometimes it's refusing to. The city kept turning, as cities do when they've seen too many truths to be startled by one more. The facades peeled a little, like shedding skin. In the mornings, tourists still searched for the stages of a scripted love. Children chased weary pigeons. A violinist played beneath an arch. No one, seeing Lucia buying bread or Matteo locking his bike, would guess there'd been a live stream, a wound, a crowd hungry for honesty. Yet everything was there, quietly, like foundations beneath the surface. One afternoon of obedient light, Lucia, now lowercase, no longer the capitalized heroine, paused on Ponte Pietra and placed her hands on the warm stone. She remembered the first day she faked a smile for a perfect photo. Remembered the dry crack of the microphone turning on, the words escaping, the life unraveling. She thought that sometimes truth arrives as clumsiness, as a technical error. That what matters isn't the explosion, but the silence one allows afterward. She breathed. Boats drifted downstream, leaving faint grooves the light filled with gold. A child asked his mother a question, the mother answered with an ancient patience. From a few steps away, Matteo gestured toward a new cafe with his chin. She nodded. They walked that way. The shadows showed their softest edge. They weren't heroes. They weren't villains. They were two people who had used a plan to manage their fears, and who, by accident, on live broadcast, found themselves. What began as a lie had delivered, belatedly, an improbable truth. Not the melodic authenticity of speeches, but the kind that unsettles first, and then lets the body sit upright in its own chair. Verona, patient witness, lent them its streets to learn. Its stone balconies to look without posing. Its churches to sit in silence without praying. Its river, to carry away the words that no longer needed saying. When they reached the cafe, Lucia touched her hair and laughed, without checking with anyone first. Matteo held the door open, his hand outstretched, and let her go in before him. Inside, the air smelled of sweet bread and ground coffee. They sat by the window. Outside, the world looked like a winter film, people hurrying past in thick coats and quiet colors. They didn't talk about numbers, brands, or collaborations. They talked about the neighbor who had started doing yoga, the cat that slipped into the courtyard, the cold that hinted at snow in the mountains. Small conversations are where life learns not to hurt itself. When they left, the sky had that rare, clear color Verona only shows a few days each year, as if someone had wiped the heavens clean with a cloth. They crossed the bridge, each with their coat buttoned. A man glanced at them and smiled with a kindness that asked for nothing in return. Sometimes people don't judge. Sometimes they simply wish you well. Their steps fell in rhythm over the stone. It wasn't choreography, it was a new habit. At the corner, before a wall marked with careful graffiti, they said goodbye with a brief, unceremonious hug. Lucia walked on toward Santo Stefano. Matteo took a side street to follow the river a little longer. The bells of Santa Anastasia struck a quarter hour. No one applauded. No one filmed. Some stories end with a kiss. This one ends in breath, in and out, without effort, as if the body had finally learned to do it on its own. In Verona, a city that has made love its stage, two people step down from the spotlight and learn to walk behind the scenery. It's less dazzling there. dusty, even. But it smells more like home. And when night settled still over the Adige, both, in their separate beds, heard something like peace. They didn't know if it would last, and didn't need to. It was enough, that calm stretch of time, that humble breath that asks for no witnesses, that quiet truth with no need for headlines. Sometimes life, to begin again, chooses the sound of a microphone left on, the rest depends on how well we can fall silent, and listen to what, at last, we've said without meaning to.